What if I told you that within the records of the soul there lies a story so hidden, so charged with danger, that men through centuries dared not place it among their sacred books? A story not of fable but of fact, preserved like an ember in the Book of Enoch, guarded by a tradition that knew its weight, and yet ignored by many, because it unsettled the foundations of faith. This is the tale of the Watchers, angels of high estate who descended from the order of heaven into the realm of men, not with a message of light, but with gifts that darkened the spirit. And I have seen in the visions of the Akashic record that this story is not only about them, but about us. For the same hunger that drew them down still burns in human hearts today, the hunger for power without wisdom, for knowledge without reverence, for mastery without surrender, and it is this hunger that makes this account forbidden. The Watchers were not strangers to the eternal law. They were appointed as guardians, beings of vigilance who should have watched and guided. Yet the record shows how desire turned the watcher into the breaker, how longing for what was not given became the seed of downfall. For when they looked upon the daughters of men and felt the pull of flesh, they crossed the first boundary, and boundaries once broken are rarely repaired. From this desire flowed a decision, and from that decision a descent, and the descent was not merely geographical, it was spiritual. For in leaving their appointed place, they left also their alignment with the divine harmony. I saw how they bound themselves in oaths upon Mount Hermon, each swearing to take wives of the human race, each agreeing to bear the consequence together, for sin loves company, and what began as secret longing became an open rebellion. Their leader, Semyaza, declaring that the act once begun could not be reversed, and so a band of 200 crossed into our world, appearing as teachers, as revealers, as givers of wisdom, and men welcomed them. For men have always hungered for hidden things, but hidden things not prepared for the spirit become poison, and so it was. They unveiled the craft of metals, the shaping of swords and shields. They disclosed the art of enchantments, the weaving of charms, the binding of spirits. They unfolded the map of the heavens, how to read the stars not as signs of wonder, but as tools of fate. And humanity, still in its innocence, received these like a child handed blades, fascinated but unaware of the blood to come. In the vision, I perceived the vibration of the earth shifting, for knowledge is never neutral. It carries frequency, and the knowledge given by the Watchers pulsed with corruption. What they taught bent the mind toward domination. What they showed ignited the flame of arrogance. Men who once trusted in God's provision now trusted in iron and in incantation. Women once content with simple adornments now clothed themselves with glamour that drew envy and lust. And in the hearts of nations rose the thought that man could rival heaven. And here lies the reason the story was forbidden. For in telling it plainly, one must admit that man's downfall was not slow and natural, but swift and accelerated by powers from above. One must admit that the line between angel and man was crossed, and that knowledge meant to be shielded was thrown recklessly into hands unready. And in the soul's record it is written that this is always the danger of forbidden knowledge, that it gives before it prepares. It offers mastery without maturity. It gives light without the lamp of discipline, and thus blinds rather than illumines. Why then did God forbid such knowledge? Not out of jealousy, not to keep man small, but as a father forbids a child from fire until he knows how to tend it. For what is untimely received becomes destruction, and the Watchers cared not for the timing, they cared only for desire. And so the gift became a curse, the blessing a burden. Even now, as I speak across time, I sense in the hearts of men that same temptation, the reaching for secrets, the lust for mastery of nature, of destiny, of one another. And I say to you, beware, for the story of the Watchers is not ancient only, it is a mirror of the present, and every age has its forbidden knowledge dressed in new garments, whether it be weapons of fire, formulas of power, or sciences that manipulate the seed of life itself. All these stand as echoes of the first descent, and the question remains, will man learn to wait for wisdom or repeat the arrogance of angels? The descent of the Watchers was not a tale of gentle teaching, but of a violent rupture. For once the angels crossed into the realm of men, they began to pour out knowledge in streams that dazzled the eyes yet poisoned the heart, and I saw in the records that what they gave was never neutral. It always bore the vibration of their rebellion. The knowledge of metals that allowed mankind to shape tools was swiftly turned to weapons, swords and spears that stained the earth with blood. The secrets of beauty became arts of seduction, painting the face, adorning the body, stirring envy and lust that clouded the spirit. The unveiling of enchantments became a door to sorcery, men and women invoking forces they did not comprehend, binding themselves with powers that whispered lies into their souls. And the charting of the heavens, once a song of God's order, became instead a scheme of control, mankind, seeking to bend destiny by reading stars that were never meant to be their masters. This was the essence of forbidden knowledge, power without reverence, mastery without responsibility. I perceived in the vibrations of those days a quickening of corruption, a speed of decay unlike the slow errors of ordinary human weakness. For when man sins in ignorance, he can be corrected, but when man sins with power in his hands, his fall is multiplied. And so the earth filled with violence, not as a gradual drift, but as a flood of pride and bloodshed. Neighbors no longer trusted one another, tribes sharpened their blades, and sorcery became a language of deceit whispered from house to house, and the air itself carried a weight of darkness that pressed upon creation. Genesis echoes this when it declares that every inclination of man's heart was evil continually. But the Book of Enoch unveils the reason. The watchers had sown seeds of arrogance, and men watered them eagerly. For to the human mind the offer of mastery is always sweet, even when it hides poison. And so the divine order was mocked. The balance of heaven and earth was broken. And I saw in the soul record that creation itself groaned under the burden of human pride. The greatest tragedy was not merely the violence of weapons or the charms of sorcery, but the loss of dependence on the Creator. For once man believed he could forge his own destiny, he ceased to seek God. Once he believed the stars could dictate his fate, he ceased to pray. Once he believed in herbs and spells, he ceased to trust the spirit that gives life. And this is why forbidden knowledge is always more dangerous than ignorance, because it replaces humility with illusion. It feeds the soul with pride, and pride is the beginning of destruction. This truth echoes across ages. For knowledge given without maturity always births arrogance. I beheld how mothers and fathers taught their children the ways of these angels, passing on secrets as though they were treasures. Yet the treasures turned to chains, binding generations in corruption, and the children of these unions, the Nephilim, grew mighty and terrible, giants in strength but empty in spirit, symbols of what happens when heaven's gifts are twisted by rebellion, and their presence magnified the ruin of the earth. For where they walked, destruction followed, and the blood of innocents cried out from the soil. I understood then why God withheld such knowledge, not to keep man weak, but to protect him until he could grow into wisdom. For knowledge is like fire, it can warm or it can consume, and in those days it consumed. And the watchers cared not for the ruin they caused. They delighted in the pride of man, for it mirrored their own defiance. They reveled in the chaos, because chaos mocked the Creator's order. And so the corruption spread until the very thought of man was bent toward evil. And in the records I heard the sorrow of God, a sorrow deeper than anger, for he saw his creation choosing destruction over life. The forbidden teachings became a net that entangled not only bodies but spirits, leading men into covenants with unseen powers that devoured their peace. And in those dark unions they felt strong but grew hollow, for the soul was never made to feed on deception. And I testify that this is the mark of all forbidden knowledge. It gives a sense of power but drains the essence of life. It offers dominion but takes away communion. And thus the people of that age lived with eyes glittering with secret knowledge, yet hearts empty of true wisdom. I tell you plainly, this is why the Book of Enoch preserves the list of teachings, to show not the glory of hidden wisdom, but its ruin, to remind us that man's fall was not merely through appetite, but through pride, that when angels offered the crown of mastery, man reached for it and found it to be a crown of thorns, and the earth itself bore the scars of that choice. The weight of corruption grew unbearable, and in the records of the soul I perceived how the earth itself became a mirror of the chaos sown by the watchers, the rivers thick with blood, the air filled with incantations, the hearts of men swollen with pride. And what was once creation in harmony became a battlefield of power, envy, and lust, and the cry of innocence rose to the heavens demanding answer, for the balance of the divine order had been broken beyond repair, and no generation could escape the contagion. God, in his sorrow, looked upon the earth and saw that every inclination of the heart was bent toward evil, and his grief was not the rage of a tyrant, but the sorrow of a father who beholds his children lost in a fire they kindled themselves, for knowledge untempered by humility had turned to madness, and the watchers, once guardians, had become corrupters, rejoicing in the ruin they caused. I saw in vision how the archangels were summoned, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, mighty beings who remained faithful, each receiving a command to undo the damage that the watchers had unleashed, and their descent was not in rebellion but in obedience, not to claim wives or wield forbidden power, but to restore order and preserve a remnant of life. Michael was charged to bind the rebellious angels, casting them into abysses of shadow, a prison not of human making but of divine decree, chains of spirit that no hand could break, and these fallen ones would await the final judgment, never again to roam free, their rebellion silenced, though their legacy endured. Raphael was commanded to heal the earth, to cleanse the corruption that spread like a poison through soil and water, to restore what innocence could yet be salvaged, though much was beyond repair, for when man wields forbidden knowledge, the scars cut deep into creation itself, and nature weeps long after the act is done. Gabriel was appointed to warn, to strike fear into the hearts of men, to awaken them from illusions of power, and show them the futility of rebellion, yet few listened, for the intoxication of false mastery blinded their eyes. And Uriel, whose name means light of God, was tasked to proclaim judgment, to reveal to Enoch and through him to generations the truth of why destruction must come. For judgment without understanding breeds despair, but judgment explained becomes a lesson for the ages. Then came the decree of cleansing, the great flood, not a random catastrophe, but a deliberate act of renewal. For when corruption saturates every root, the only way to save the tree is to prune it to the ground and begin again. And though it seems destruction, in truth it is mercy, for in wiping away the violence, God preserved the possibility of purity, and in sparing Noah and his household, he preserved a remnant uncorrupted by the watcher's teachings. Noah was not spared because of perfection, but because of alignment. His heart remained attuned to the divine rhythm, his bloodline untainted by the unions of angels and men, and through him humanity would walk a new path, a path of dependence on the Creator, rather than illusions of control. And this is the reason the flood stands as both tragedy and hope, for though the old world perished, a seed of innocence was carried across the waters. I felt the sorrow of those waters, not only drowning flesh, but drowning pride, washing away arrogance, breaking the illusions that had enslaved men to sorcery and violence. Yet within that sorrow I also saw mercy, for destruction without preservation is cruelty, but destruction with a remnant is renewal, and the ark became the vessel of continuity, a bridge from corruption into cleansing. The watchers, bound and silenced, serve as a warning that even beings of celestial power are accountable, that no throne, however radiant, is above the order of God. And this is the eternal principle. Rebellion may thrive for a time, but judgment comes, and judgment is not the end, but the re-establishment of balance. The souls of that age tasted both the allure of power and the bitterness of its consequence, and the record of their downfall stands so that generations might learn what happens when knowledge is torn from wisdom, when freedom is severed from responsibility, and when pride blinds the eyes of the spirit. I tell you, the great flood is not merely an event of history, it is a pattern of the soul. For when corruption overwhelms a life or a nation, cleansing must come, and though it feels like loss, it is often mercy in disguise, removing what would destroy utterly in order to preserve what can yet be healed. Look upon the story of the watchers not as distant myth, but as living mirror. For in every age man reaches again for forbidden mastery, In every age God restrains, warns, and if unheeded, cleanses, and in every age a remnant is preserved, that the divine image may not be lost. The reason knowledge was forbidden is written deep within the pattern of the soul, for knowledge itself is not evil, it is light. But when light enters a vessel unprepared, it blinds rather than illumines. And when I beheld the story of the watchers, I understood that what God withheld, he withheld not to enslave man, but to shield him, just as a father withholds fire from a child until the hand is steady. For power without maturity becomes destruction, and the records of that age testify to this truth. For once men received the secrets of metals, enchantments, and stars, they ceased to walk in trust. They ceased to ask of God, and in their pride they used the gifts not to bless but to dominate, not to build but to destroy, not to worship but to exalt themselves. The soul grows by stages, just as the body grows, and each stage has its rightful lessons. A child must learn humility before it handles mastery. It must learn trust before it wields control. But the watchers tore open a gate too soon, placing into human hands powers that belonged to a later age, and thus the rhythm of growth was shattered, and corruption rushed in. This is why the Creator forbids certain things for a time, not to starve us of wisdom, but to guard us until the vessel of our being is strong enough to carry the weight of truth. In the Akashic record, I have often seen souls who grasped for power prematurely, and the result was always sorrow, whether in ancient times through sorcery and false visions, or in modern times through dominion over nature and machines. For when knowledge races ahead of wisdom, the soul stumbles, and the stumbling is great. This is the same principle that lay behind the forbidden tree in Eden. Not that fruit itself was evil, but that to seize it before the heart was ripened meant to know good and evil without the capacity to endure it. And so the watchers gave fruit unripe, and mankind choked on its bitterness. I saw in vision that forbidden knowledge always comes dressed as liberation. It whispers to man that he need not wait, that he can be as gods now, that he can master fate, command nature, bend destiny. But what it gives is an illusion. For mastery gained without discipline is not mastery but bondage. The more man trusted in weapons, the more he became enslaved to violence. The more he trusted in charms, the more he became bound to deception. The more he trusted in stars, the more he lost the freedom of faith. And thus what appeared as empowerment was in truth enslavement. And this is the mark of all forbidden knowledge. It promised control, but deliver captivity. God foresaw this, and this is why he withheld. Not because he feared rivals, not because he sought to keep man ignorant, but because he knew that wisdom grows slowly, and to place fire in an unready hand is to burn the house. This truth is echoed in every age, for even now humanity stands at thresholds of knowledge, unlocking secrets of atoms, of genes, of the mind itself, and the temptation remains the same, to seize mastery before humility, to claim control before reverence. And in this I see the shadow of the watchers, repeating in new forms. The lesson of Enoch is clear. Boundaries are not prisons but protections. They are fences set by love to guard the soul from ruin until it can walk with strength. And when man rages against these boundaries, he proves not his freedom but his folly. For no soul can bear power without first learning obedience. No spirit can command creation without first bowing to the Creator. And when this order is broken, collapse is inevitable. In those days, collapse came as the flood, a cleansing of corruption. In this age, collapse will come in other forms, whether through wars born of arrogant science or through emptiness born of spiritual pride, but always the principle is the same. When man grasps for what is withheld, he finds not life but loss. Yet there is mercy even in withholding, for God does not leave the soul in ignorance forever. He prepares the vessel, he matures the spirit, he reveals in stages, line upon line, truth upon truth, until what was once forbidden can become blessing, and the true knowledge is not hidden in metals or stars or charms, but in communion with him. For to walk with God as Enoch walked is to know wisdom beyond all enchantments, To trust as Noah trusted is to possess a strength beyond all weapons, and to bow before the Creator is to hold a light brighter than all stars. The forbidden teachings of the Watchers revealed themselves in three streams, each appearing as wisdom, but each corrupting the soul, and I saw in the record how these streams flowed into every part of human life until the earth was darkened by their shadow. The first was the craft of weapons, the second was the art of sorcery, and the third was the reading of the stars. And together they reshaped mankind into a mirror of pride, for what God intended as tools for stewardship were twisted into tools of domination, and man who once lived in simplicity and trust became swollen with arrogance and bloodlust. The craft of weapons began with the shaping of metals, for before this men fought with hands or with stones, and the harm they could cause was limited. But when the Watchers disclosed the art of smelting and forging, the edge of iron and the hardness of bronze became instruments of destruction, and neighbors turned against one another with swords in their hands. Tribes conquered tribes. Kings rose by bloodshed, and the earth was stained. The vibration of creation grew heavy with violence, and I beheld in vision that with every blow struck by those weapons the heart of man grew harder, for power over life and death had shifted into his grip, and such power without reverence makes the soul blind. This is why the record declares that the earth was filled with violence, for it was not natural decay, but the fruit of forbidden skill. The art of sorcery appeared more subtle, yet it was no less deadly, for the Watchers taught men and women enchantments, charms, and the use of plants and stones, not for healing of the body, but for manipulation of the unseen. And once man tasted the illusion of commanding spirits, he became ensnared, thinking himself wise while becoming captive to shadows. And I have seen in the soul's record how such practices drain the essence, feeding pride while devouring peace. For sorcery always begins with curiosity but ends in bondage. It promises vision but delivers deception. It offers control but steals communion. And the people of that age trusted in spells rather than in God. They bound themselves with words they did not understand. They invoked forces that whispered lies, and thus they walked in a fog of illusion, and in that fog humility died. The reading of the stars was the third stream, and though the heavens declare the glory of God, the Watchers twisted this wonder into fatalism, teaching men to believe that their destiny lay in the movement of lights rather than in the hand of the Creator. And when men place faith in the stars, they cease to place faith in God. When they seek to control fate, they cease to surrender to divine guidance. And so astrology became a snare, replacing worship with calculation, and man began to think himself able to master his future. Yet in truth he became enslaved to illusions, for no star can save, no constellation can forgive, no planet can redeem, and to trust them is to exchange the eternal for the temporary, the Creator for creation. These three streams flowed together into a river of corruption. Weapons gave men the means to kill, sorcery gave them the illusion of mastery, and astrology gave them false confidence, and with these combined they believed they could live without God. Yet the fruit was decay, families divided, nations at war, souls bound to darkness, and creation groaning under their arrogance. And I saw that this is always the outcome when man grasps what is forbidden. The gift becomes poison, the promise becomes snare. I testify that even in our age these same streams flow in new garments, for weapons are now fashioned with fire and machines. Sorcery appears as false sciences and manipulations of the mind. Astrology appears as philosophies that place fate in forces rather than in God. Yet the essence remains the same. Humanity trusting in power without reverence, pursuing mastery without humility, and each time the soul is drawn deeper into captivity. The lesson of the Watchers is therefore not only of the past but of the present. For when man places his trust in weapons, he forgets the God who protects. When he places his hope in spells or systems, he forgets the Spirit who guides. When he looks to stars or theories, he forgets the Creator who holds destiny. And thus the same corruption repeats, not because God withholds too much, but because man receives too soon, and what is received too soon cannot bless, it can only curse. The corruption that followed the watchers spread like fire across dry grass, and I saw in the record that once pride took root, it grew without restraint, for weapons gave men confidence to kill. Sorcery gave them illusions of mastery, and astrology gave them false guidance. And together these three streams poisoned every aspect of human life, and the earth that was once created to be a garden of harmony became instead a field of blood and arrogance. Families turned upon each other, neighbors became enemies, tribes rose in conquest, and the innocence that once marked the human heart was drowned beneath waves of violence and lust. The Nephilim, the offspring of the watchers and the daughters of men, walked among humanity as giants in body and in cruelty, and wherever they moved, the land trembled under their oppression, for their strength was not matched by humility, but was swollen with pride. They devoured the labors of men. They shed innocent blood. They mocked the divine order, and they became symbols of what happens when power is divorced from righteousness, and their presence magnified the despair of the earth, for men looked upon them and felt only fear and submission, forgetting the Creator who alone is sovereign. The women adorned with secrets of glamour carried themselves as idols, stirring envy and rivalry, and men intoxicated with weapons and charms strutted as masters of fate, and the vibration of creation was heavy with arrogance. For every heart imagined only evil, and in their dreams men plotted sorcery and conquest, and in their waking hours they carried it out with relentless zeal, and the cry of the earth rose to the heavens, a cry of blood, a cry of grief, a cry that demanded cleansing. The book of Genesis records simply that the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. But in the vision I saw the detail of that corruption. I saw altars where sorcery replaced prayer. I saw kings who gloried in conquest and mocked the meek. I saw women bound not by love but by seduction and envy. I saw children raised in shadows of violence, learning charms before they learned truth. And I saw the Nephilim standing as lords of fear, devouring life and spreading despair. And in all of this, the name of God was forgotten, the worship of the Creator replaced by worship of self and by fear of false powers. The sorrow of God was profound, for he had made man in innocence and breathed into him his spirit. Yet now man breathed only pride, and I felt in the records his grief, not the wrath of a tyrant, but the broken heart of a father, who looked upon his creation and saw them choosing ruin over life. And the angels who remained faithful wept with him, for the harmony of heaven had been mocked, the order of creation shattered, and what was meant for joy had become a theater of violence and deception. I understood then that corruption unchecked becomes a sickness that spreads to every limb, and just as the body must sometimes endure the surgeon's knife to remove the gangrene, so too creation required cleansing, and this is why judgment came, not from cruelty but from mercy. For if corruption continued unchecked, no remnant of innocence would remain, no vessel would be fit to carry the image of God, and the earth itself would collapse under the weight of blood and arrogance. In this recognition lies the truth of divine boundaries, for when God withholds it is not because he envies, and when he judges it is not because he delights in destruction, but because he loves too deeply to let corruption devour all. And so he resolved to cleanse by flood, to bind the watchers in chains, to remove the Nephilim from the earth, and to preserve only a remnant, that the image of God might not be lost. Noah was that remnant, and in the record I saw how he walked, not in perfection but in alignment, his heart still listening to the divine rhythm, his trust still rooted in the Creator, his bloodline untouched by the unions that had twisted humanity. And for this reason he found grace. For when a soul clings to God amid corruption, it becomes a beacon of preservation, and through such a soul the Creator renews the earth. The decree of judgment was issued, and in the soul's record I beheld how heaven stirred with solemn purpose. For when corruption reaches its fullness, divine order must act, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity, to preserve what can yet live. And the command was given to the archangels who remained faithful, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, each appointed to a work of cleansing and restoration, each a witness that no rebellion, however great, can stand against the eternal law. Michael, the warrior of light, was charged with binding the watchers, And I saw in vision how he descended with chains not forged of iron but of spirit, bonds woven of divine decree, unbreakable by any power of rebellion. And he cast the fallen ones into the abyss, a prison of shadow where they would await the final judgment, and their cries echoed in the depths, yet no plea could undo their choice, for they had crossed a boundary that heaven itself had set, and the chains became a testimony that even angels are accountable to order. Raphael, whose name means God heals, was sent to cleanse the earth of the corruption that spread like poison. And I saw him move through the waters, purging the filth, restoring what innocence remained, though much had been spoiled beyond repair, for the forbidden teachings had soaked into soil and flesh alike, and nature itself bore scars of man's arrogance. Yet through his work a path was prepared for renewal, so that when the flood came, the waters would not only destroy but also wash away. Gabriel, the herald of God, was given charge to sound the alarm, to awaken the conscience of men, to confront them with the futility of their sorcery and pride. And though few heeded, his proclamation stood as a witness, for God never judges without warning, never cleanses without first declaring, and those who hardened their hearts chose their fate, while those who trembled at his words became seeds of the remnant. Uriel, the light of God, was commanded to reveal the meaning of these judgments to Enoch, to preserve in record what happened so that future generations would understand, for destruction without interpretation breeds only fear, but destruction explained becomes instruction. And thus the Book of Enoch carries the witness of this age, not as myth, but as memory, a memory of rebellion, corruption, judgment, and mercy interwoven. Then the flood was prepared, waters gathered in the deep, clouds thickened in the sky, and the decree was spoken that the earth would be cleansed, and I felt in the record the trembling of creation as it awaited release. For the elements themselves obey the Creator, and when he speaks, the seas rise. When he commands, the heavens open. And so it was. The floodgates broke, the fountains of the deep surged, and rain poured without ceasing, drowning pride, sweeping away violence, erasing arrogance, until all that had been tainted was gone. Noah and his household entered the ark, a vessel not of their own design, but of divine instruction. For God had shown him how to build it, every measure, every detail, a structure of obedience floating upon judgment, and as the waters lifted it high, it became the vessel of continuity, carrying forward the covenant, preserving a remnant, a sign that though God cleanses, he also preserves, and though he judges, he also saves, for mercy is never absent, even in wrath. The cries of those outside rose as the waters climbed, but it was too late, for when a soul mocks the warnings and scorns the mercy, judgment becomes unavoidable. And I understood that the ark is more than wood and pitch. It is the symbol of alignment, for whoever walks with God becomes a vessel of survival, and whoever clings to pride is swept away. And this pattern is written into every age. The flood was not chaos, but order restored, not cruelty, but mercy disguised. For by removing the corruption, God gave humanity a chance to begin anew, and by preserving Noah, he ensured that the divine image would not vanish, and the waters that destroyed also purified, washing away illusions, cleansing creation of the stains of the watcher's rebellion. And when the flood receded, a new earth emerged, fresh, silent, awaiting the planting of righteousness once more. I testify that in the vision I saw the grief of God mingled with his resolve, for he took no pleasure in destruction, yet he would not allow corruption to reign forever. And this is the mystery of judgment. It is sorrowful yet necessary, fierce yet merciful, for love cannot allow death to swallow life, nor darkness to smother light. And when patience is exhausted, cleansing must come. The ark resting upon Ararat became a symbol for generations, declaring that obedience is salvation, that humility is refuge, and that trust is stronger than forbidden power. And the chains of the watchers buried in shadow stand as witness that rebellion, however dazzling, ends always in bondage. And together these two symbols, Teach the soul that there is no mastery greater than surrender to God, no safety beyond His command, no wisdom apart from His timing. The imprisonment of the watchers was not merely a punishment, but a testimony. And in the records of the soul I saw how their binding became a symbol for all ages, for it declares that no being, however radiant, can escape accountability to divine order, and it reminds the soul that rebellion is never without consequence, even when cloaked in brilliance, for what they carried was not ignorance but pride, and pride, once grown, demand shame. The abyss into which they were cast was not only a place of shadow, but a reflection of their own vibration, for what is chosen inwardly becomes the dwelling outwardly. And since they chose darkness, they inherited darkness, and their cries echo through the ages as warnings, whispering to every soul that power without humility is bondage, that mastery without obedience is ruin. I understood that the Watcher's imprisonment reveals something profound about the law of creation. For in God's order, even angels are bound to responsibility. Even celestial beings cannot trespass without answer. And this law stretches across the cosmos. For the smallest seed and the greatest star alike move by rhythm and decree. And when the rhythm is broken, restoration comes through judgment. And so the chains of the Watchers remain as silent teachers, proclaiming that the universe itself bends toward justice. Yet though they were bound, their legacy lingered, for knowledge once sown cannot be erased, and humanity still carried fragments of their forbidden teachings, and I saw how across civilizations echoes of those secrets reappeared, metal shaping into weapons of war, enchantments cloaked as wisdom, astrology disguised as guidance, and though the Watchers themselves were confined, their influence endured in the habits and illusions of men, and this is the danger of corruption. It outlives the corrupter, it spreads beyond the moment, embedding itself in culture, in memory, in desire. I perceived how this legacy became a test for every age, for the temptation of forbidden knowledge does not vanish. It adapts, it wears new garments, it offers itself in different forms, yet always the essence is the same, the promise of power apart from God, the illusion of mastery without reverence. And I tell you plainly, the spirit of the Watchers still whispers in this age, though men call it by other names, whether through sciences pursued without morality, or dominion sought without humility, or philosophies that exalt creation over the Creator, the shadow of their rebellion still casts itself upon the path of humanity. The wisdom of their imprisonment is this, that even beings of vast might are not free from judgment, and if angels fell by pride, how much more must men guard their hearts? If the Watchers could not escape accountability, neither can any soul that chooses arrogance over obedience. And thus their story is not only about the past, but about the present condition of every spirit. In the vision I saw that their chains also serve as boundaries for humanity, for had they remained free, their corruption would have consumed all, and by binding them God preserved a remnant, showing mercy even in judgment. And this is always His way, to limit the power of darkness so that light can yet prevail, to confine rebellion so that obedience can yet flourish, and to seal the corrupters so that the innocent may be preserved. The echo of their teaching in astrology reveals how men still look to the stars for destiny, but I say destiny is not in the constellations, it is in the Creator. The echo of their teaching in sorcery shows how men still seek shortcuts to mastery, but I say mastery is only through surrender, and the echo of their teaching in weapons shows how men still trust in violence, but I say true strength is in humility, and until these illusions are seen for what they are, humanity will continue to repeat the cycle of pride and ruin. Yet the records also reveal hope, for just as chains were placed on the Watchers, so too can chains be placed on the influences they spread. And when a soul turns from pride and surrenders to God, the whisper of forbidden power loses its grip, and what was once poison can no longer harm. And this is the great secret of redemption, that even when corruption lingers, its hold can be broken by obedience, and even when shadows whisper, their light can be drowned by the greater light of the Creator. The Watcher's imprisonment teaches also that nothing hidden remains unaccounted, and I tell you, every soul carries within it both the memory of temptation and the law of responsibility, and when the two collide, choice is demanded, and in that choice lies destiny, either the chains of pride or the freedom of surrender, either the abyss of rebellion or the light of obedience, and this choice is as present today as in the days of Enoch. After the waters receded and Noah stepped upon a cleansed earth, I saw in the records that humanity was given a new beginning, a chance to walk in humility, to remember the cost of pride, and to cherish dependence on the Creator. Yet the memory of forbidden knowledge lingered, like embers hidden beneath ash, waiting for the breath of desire to stir them into flame once more. For though the watchers were bound and their children destroyed, the teachings they had sown were not erased from the hearts of men, and this is the tragedy of corruption, that it survives beyond judgment, carried in memory, in imagination, in longing, and in every age mankind must choose again whether to follow wisdom or to reach for forbidden mastery. The generations after Noah soon revealed the same pattern, for though they had seen the flood, they began to rebuild with pride. They raised cities. They pursued their own name. They set their eyes on heaven not in worship but in rivalry. And the Tower of Babel rose as testimony that the heart of man still desired to climb without surrender, to seize what was not granted, and the scattering of tongues was another act of mercy. For God would not allow pride to unify mankind in rebellion, lest the corruption once more devour all. I beheld in vision how sorcery reappeared, cloaked in new forms, how men still looked to the stars for destiny, how weapons were sharpened again, and though the flood had washed away bodies, it could not wash away choice, and choice remains the battlefield of the soul, and every soul must decide whether to walk in humility or to chase illusion. The spirit of the watchers whispered through the centuries, not in visible form but in influence, urging men to seek power without reverence, knowledge without love, mastery without obedience, and though angels were chained, the echo of their rebellion still touched human imagination. For temptation does not die with the tempter. It waits in the heart of man, and man himself becomes his own watcher, choosing whether to betray or to guard. In Egypt I saw fragments of their legacy, mysteries preserved in temples, enchantments exalted as divine science. In Babylon I saw the stars worshipped, their movements charted as rulers of fate. In Assyria I saw the sword raised in arrogance, kingdoms built by violence. And in all these I recognized the shadow of the ancient corruption, for though the flood cleansed, pride returned. And this cycle repeats because man forgets, and forgetting is itself a form of blindness. The lesson of Enoch was not meant only for his age, but for all ages, that boundaries exist for protection, that knowledge must wait upon wisdom, that power apart from God becomes poison, yet humanity struggles with this truth, desiring always to cross the line. And in my readings I have seen the same spirit arise again and again, in different nations, in different garments, yet always the same essence, the pursuit of control, apart from surrender. The Nephilim were destroyed, yet in memory they became legends, and legends became myths, and myths became allurements, and men longed for the greatness of giants, forgetting the ruin they brought, and so they sought to recover hidden powers, to invoke ancient spirits, to restore forbidden knowledge, and each attempt led only to bondage, for what was once curse cannot become blessing until the soul itself is transformed, and the soul cannot be transformed apart from God. I testify that even in this age the same pattern unfolds, humanity unlocking secrets of atom and gene, wielding knowledge of mind and machine, and yet often without humility, seeking mastery rather than communion. And I say to you, this is the echo of the watchers, repeating in modern form the same promise of power, the same illusion of control, the same neglect of divine boundaries, and if not tempered by wisdom, it will lead to the same ruin, for the law of the soul does not change. Pride still precedes destruction. Humility still preserves life. The flood was the great reset, but it was also a parable, showing that cleansing will always come when corruption saturates. And just as waters once rose, so too in every age Judgment rises in the form that meets the corruption, whether in war, in famine, in collapse, or in emptiness of spirit, and always the purpose is the same: to cleanse, to preserve, to renew, to call the soul back to God. The story of the watchers does not end with their chains, nor with the flood that swept away the corruption of their age. For in the record of the soul I have seen that its meaning stretches far beyond history, speaking to every age, to every heart, as a mirror of temptation, judgment, and mercy. And it calls us not only to remember, but to awaken. For what was forbidden then still whispers now, what corrupted then still lingers now, and the choice given then is still the choice before every soul today. Knowledge itself was never the enemy, for knowledge is a gift when carried in reverence. But knowledge untethered from wisdom is a poison, and the watchers offered power before maturity, mastery before humility, and in this act they revealed the pattern of all rebellion: to grasp before the hand is ready, to take before the heart is pure, and I testify that this pattern has repeated in countless lives and nations. For whenever man seizes control apart from God, ruin follows, and whenever man waits upon God, blessing follows. This is the eternal law. The imprisonment of the watchers teaches that no being is above accountability, that pride, whether angelic or human, leads always to chains, and the flood teaches that judgment, though it appears destruction, is mercy in disguise, for it preserves a remnant, it cleanses what can no longer heal, and it prepares the ground for renewal. And these truths must be received not as myths of old, but as living principles, written in the fabric of creation, present in the pulse of every age. In the vision I saw how humanity after the flood still stumbled, how the same temptations arose in new forms, how pride built towers, how sorcery reappeared, how violence sharpened its edge again. And I understood that the cleansing of waters was not enough to erase the possibility of corruption, for corruption is rooted in choice, and choice cannot be destroyed. It must be redeemed, and redemption comes not by force but by surrender, not by chains but by love. And this is why the story continues, leading not only to judgment but to the promise of salvation. The deeper lesson of the watchers is this: that God sets boundaries not to imprison us but to protect us, that his withholding is not denial but care, that his timing is mercy. And when man respects these boundaries, he grows in strength. But when he mocks them, he invites ruin. And though the watchers offered mastery, the true mastery is found in humility. Though they promised wisdom, the true wisdom is found in trust. Though they revealed secrets, the true secret is communion with the Creator. And this truth outlasts every rebellion. I tell you plainly, the greatest danger is not what the watchers taught, but what humanity still craves: the desire to live without dependence, to rule without obedience, to know without surrender. And this desire is the seed of all downfall, and its fruit is always the same: arrogance, violence, despair, judgment, and cleansing. And yet within the cycle there is always mercy, for God preserves a remnant, he binds the corruptors, he resets creation, he offers redemption, and he calls every soul back to himself. When I entered the records, I saw not only the past, but the present mirrored in it. For today, humanity stands again at the threshold of forbidden knowledge, holding powers that can heal or destroy, technologies that can serve or enslave, insights that can illumine or corrupt. And the question is the same as it was in Enoch's day: will we wield knowledge with humility or with pride? Will we walk in reverence or in defiance? Will we build arks of obedience or towers of arrogance? And the answer will shape not only our fate, but the vibration of the earth itself. The chains of the watchers still testify that rebellion cannot last forever, and the ark still testifies that trust preserves life, and the flood still testifies that cleansing will come when corruption overflows. And together they form a chorus that calls to the soul: choose wisely, walk humbly, wait patiently, trust deeply. For true wisdom is not hidden in stars or metals or charms. It is hidden in the heart that bows before the Creator. In the quiet of the Spirit, I feel the enduring sorrow of God at the pride of his children, but I also feel his mercy, patient, unyielding, never abandoning, always preserving a path of return. And this is the final truth, that no chain, no flood, no judgment has the last word, but love. For love is the reason he withholds. Love is the reason he judges. Love is the reason he preserves. And love is the reason he calls us still beyond forbidden knowledge, beyond illusions of mastery, into communion with himself.